Hi there. I think we can start now. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. So my name is Christina. I'm a fellow with the MAG team. Anna couldn't make it today, but I'll be facilitating today. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. This is our first MAG Knowledge Exchange Initiative Spotlight of 2016. We have with us the researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, and they'll be presenting on their analysis on gender inclusiveness in ICT in the CKW program in Uganda. Quick note, this is the first session. We'll be repeating the session um, a little bit later today at 10 p.m. Pacific time. That'll be 2 p.m. Manila time, 9 a.m. Kampala, Nairobi time, and 10 p.m. 10 p.m. Seattle, 11:30 Gurgaon time. With us today, we have Genevieve Smith. She's the lead researcher and director of the Visionaria Network. We also have Juno Fitzpatrick, who's a former project implementation manager with environmental rights NGO Stakeholder Democracy Network in Nigeria. And then we also have Alix, I think I'm saying that right, Charles, who is a USAID Global Development Lab Fellow and works with the Bloom Center for Developing Economies at UC Berkeley. One second. These are the bios right here. And I wanted to thank them for presenting today. And let me start by passing it over to them and also sharing their presentation. One second. Are you guys still there? Genevieve, Alex? Okay. Okay, one second. Let me pull up your... Okay. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, if it could go to the front, that would be great.
Yes. Okay, here you go. So I'll hand it over to you guys.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Christina, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. So, as mentioned, we are a team at UC Berkeley, and our research analyzes the Community Knowledge Worker Initiative in Uganda in order to highlight gender gaps within the program and suggest gender strategies in order for Grameen Foundation to more effectively engage and support female farmers in an increasingly volatile climate environment. So the purpose of this project is to understand how a gender strategy could be applied for Grameen's ICT-based agriculture projects. We took the angle of climate change resilience in agriculture, as this was the focus of our program. And our recommendations explore practices that you, as practitioners, could implement in your project design. So recent research findings state that women are receiving less information related to climate and agriculture than men, which is problematic, as improved climate services can enhance adaptive capacity, resilience, and food security among vulnerable people. So as such, our research paper explores two key research questions. One, how could the CKW program integrate a gender focus from a resource perspective and agency perspective? And two, what are the primary challenges to integrating the gender focus, and how could these be overcome? So moving on to slide 2. Thank you. So thinking about the roadmap for this presentation. So firstly, our methodology. So our research process included desk review and literature analysis, as well as interviews with staff members of Grameen Foundation involved in the CKW program and other players in the Ugandan agricultural sector, including GSMA. So through the course of this presentation, we will briefly discuss the implications of climate change on food security, trends in gender in agriculture and gender differences in agriculture and ICT, women's involvement in agricultural programs, specifically in the sub-Saharan African region, and then think about the Community Knowledge Worker program, lessons learned, and recommendations for practitioners. Moving on to slide 3, thinking about climate change and the implications of climate change on food security. So what are these implications? For Uganda, climate change is likely to mean increased food insecurity. Approximately 4 million households in Uganda survive on smallholder farming. 30% of the population live below the poverty line and suffer food insecurity. Shifts in the spread of disease, soil erosion, land degradation, flood damage due to infrastructure, and the degrees of productivity of agricultural and natural resources are symptomatic of high exposure to climate change. Slide 4. So as we move on, thinking about the shifts in the productivity of agriculture. So for climate change, a forecast 1.5 Celsius increase in the next 20 years means extreme and more frequent periods of droughts and floods for the region. Mountain regions of Rwenzori and Semiliki Basin are vulnerable to climate shocks. And our research shows that currently 17,000 households and smallhold farms are potentially at risk of landslides. And this is in the Grameen Foundation's programmatic zones in the sub-regions of Rwenzori. However, we need to think that climate change does not happen in isolation. The negative socio-economic impacts of climate change center on poor and vulnerable farming households, with wider implications for the nation's economy, which exacerbates poverty and triggers migration and regional insecurity. According to the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, over the period of 2012 to 2014, Uganda made little progress towards achieving its Millennium Development Goals hunger target. Moreover, a shift in the viability of coffee growing in areas is predicted to potentially wipe out 265.8 million or 40% of export of Uganda's revenue. So moving on to slide 5, thinking about which households are vulnerable to food insecurity. Households vulnerable to climate change are disproportionately more likely to be headed by females, have less access to loans, and participate less frequently in community groups, such as producer associations, cultural or labor savings groups. The systematic vulnerability of households can be characterized via crop shocks, agroeconomies that are heavily dependent on crops whose value chains are sensitive to climate variability. According to the FAO latest estimates, 925 million people are currently undernourished globally. Such yield gaps reflect a large suboptimal use of inputs and insufficient adoption of the most productive technologies. So, as you know, Grameen Foundation piloted its mobile agricultural service community knowledge worker program in agro-communities in the mountainous regions of Rwenzori, reinforcing the relationship between agricultural productivity and food insecurity. Key cash and calorie crop yields that are impacted by deviations in this rainfall include coffee, maize, and banana. So moving on to slide 6, thinking about what is the solution? How can we enhance women's roles within the agricultural sector? This is a solution that Grameen is piloting, using tools to enhance women's roles. So we understand from our research that women account for 43% of the agricultural labor force in developing countries. The lack of gender mainstreaming within the agricultural sector perpetuates food insecurity and the growing yield gap for maize. In Uganda, 90% of rural women work in agriculture, compared to 53% of men. Women do 85% of the planting, 85% of the weeding, and 55% of the land preparation, and almost all of the food processing. If women farmers use the same level of resources as men on the land they farm, they would achieve the same yield levels, increasing agricultural output in developing countries between 2.5 to 4%. Closing the gender gap in agricultural yields could reduce food insecurity by 12 to 17%, bringing the FAO's forecast of the undernourished down by as much as 100 to 150 million people. I'm now going to pass over to Alix.
Okay, thank you so much, Gina. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this topic. So if we can go to the next slide. So some trends in gender and agriculture. So I'm going to talk a bit about some current trends in this. So as a bit of a background, Juno mentioned, so women in sub-Saharan Africa contribute 60 to 80% of the labor in both the household food production and the food production for the purpose of selling. However, their roles and the roles of men in agriculture vary depending on the type of crop in focus and on its importance as an income generator. So if we're looking at traditional cash crops, here we're talking about coffee, cotton, tea, tobacco. For these crops, men and women work together for the planting, as well as the management of the crop, so the weeding and the pruning and the spraying, and entire families work together for the harvesting portion, but men alone do the land opening and the plowing, and most importantly, the marketing and the income control from the crop, since the land usually belongs to them. So if a woman is to engage in producing cash crops, she'll need the permission of the man, and she may have to agree to let the man do the marketing of the crop, or the man may allow her to come to the market with him. But in most cases, men apportion the income. And this is partially due to men having easier access to transportation options for themselves and for the crops to get to the market. For female-headed households, the situation is a bit different depending on whether or not she's a remarried widow, for example, but generally they have much lower access to land and resources than men do. So for non-traditional cash crops, the situation is a bit different. Here we're talking about crops that households trade a lot of due to market liberalization and increased demand. For example, these crops are, for example, ginger, pepper, maize, beans, soy, and rice. And for these, men will help with the plowing and the planting, but 80 to 90% of the management is done by women. And for these crops as well, men contribute to the harvesting and marketing to secure the income. Women do, however, have largely sole responsibility for subsistence crops, since the activities required around these crops are a large part of a woman's role in providing food for the home. So women and children pitch in for the labor required to produce these crops, and men may contribute to the initial land preparation for the crop. The family will then eat most of these crops, but women might also sell some of the harvest to buy some basic household staple goods, such as soap. So it's important to remember that these crop categories are quite fluid. So if a subsistence crop, for example, becomes a cash crop, then the men and women's roles within these will be affected accordingly. So taking a step back from a bit of this detail, what's important to keep in mind is that despite the varying roles and engagement of both men and women in agriculture, when development agencies approach a community to introduce a program or new techniques, it's generally men who attend and participate in the session. And this is partly due to Uganda being a patriarchal society, as well as women having what we call triple roles. So they undertake reproductive, productive, and community management activities, while men usually only undertake two of them. So women therefore experience greater time constraints and just have lower literacy levels compared to men. So despite this, the CKW staff have observed that women tend to be more open to new agricultural practices than men, and that agricultural interventions are largely implemented by women, which is to say that men often transfer the knowledge to the women to do the activity on their behalf. So this tends to presents a lost opportunity and a challenge, because traditional knowledge extension models use a top-down approach that historically has been male-dominated. So therefore, men have traditionally been the ones receiving the information, and women kind of take the back seat. So let's look a bit deeper at gender differences related to ICT. If I could have the next slide, please. So, okay, great. So if we're trying to develop a truly holistic approach that supports women's engagement and productivity, there's several other key gender differences and inequalities that are important to understand. So here we have 5 of them. The first is that women generally have less access to productive resources. That includes land, information, education, and training. But access to land and secure property rights are critical to increasing agricultural productivity. So this is a huge issue because access to land facilitates access to other inputs. And even when women have access or user rights to a plot of land, they lag behind in the access to labor, inputs, information, and training. And the land that they hold is often of smaller size and lesser quality. The second factor is that women are often left out of agriculture extension and training programs. And so only an estimated 5% of agricultural extension services are directed to women globally. Third is that women face mobility and time constraints. This is again due to the triple role, which I mentioned earlier. The fourth one is that women face disproportionate access to technology. So there are 24% less likely than men to own a mobile phone in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. And women in rural areas and lower income brackets in particular tend to benefit the most from closing this gap. And finally, there's a disproportionate control over resources as well as decision-making in the household, with men having often more control over household income than women. And this may result in fewer incentives for women to participate in agricultural services since they cannot control the income. So going to the next slide, we're going to look at the potential role of ICT in all of this. So ICT here, we're talking about information and communication technology. We mean radio, video, phone, smartphone, internet. These technologies can help facilitate women's access to agricultural information, market prices, and other services. And the challenge, however, is that smallholder farmers are considered often as an undifferentiated group of beneficiaries with the same needs and opportunities, which is to say that men and women are being considered together rather than separately, when in fact they have very unique challenges and offer very unique opportunities as well. So going to the next slide, please. We're going to take a look at some of the global trends happening around gender inclusivity in agriculture. So worldwide, the movement to increase women's involvement in agriculture is quickly gaining speed and momentum. For example, there are global conferences, such as the 2010 Global Conference on Agricultural Research and Development, that release recommendations for specific actions to strengthen the value of agricultural knowledge and innovation for rural women in particular. In response to this global movement, some organizations have been implementing gender-sensitive programs, and others focus on more the research side of things and ensuring that this research encompasses men and women's roles and needs within agriculture. So some organizations on the research side of things are, for example, the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research and the Global Forum for Agricultural Research. And these organizations call for that capacity building piece. And then we have on-the-ground players, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for example. They support gender-responsive agricultural development programs that follow steps towards ensuring gender awareness within the agricultural sector. So the Gates Foundations, they offer a great chart that maps actionable recommendations on how to ensure that programs are both gender aware and gender transformative. So you'll find a link in that table as well in our written report. And two other valuable tools are worth mentioning. The first is the FAO Gender and Agriculture Source Book. And this tool provides some practical advice and guidelines and principles of approaches that have achieved gender mainstreaming. And the second is the USAID Women Empowerment Agriculture Index, also a very innovative tool that tracks women's engagement. So zooming in a little bit and looking at sub-Saharan Africa, there's a high risk there, the negative impacts of climate change, as Juno talked about, but the increasing role that women play in smallholder agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa provides an opportunity to impact this food production. So our research identified three valuable elements of successful programs. Actually, can you go to the next slide, please? Sorry, I forgot to point that out. So the first piece is that models, so here I'm talking about the successes. The first piece is that models should incorporate financial advisory services along with the agricultural support. This will make programs generally more replicable and effective. A specific example of this is the Mercy Corps AgriFin mobile program. The second is that trainings that seek to tackle the knowledge deficit regarding productive planting and fertilizer techniques with locally relevant dissemination programs seem to be more effective. The third, that projects that sought to share adaptation strategies between analogous villages tended to create high levels of trust in the information disseminated, which is an important piece here, the trust piece. And on the other hand, some challenges to keep in mind. The first and probably most important one is that the informal and formal rules and the institutional arrangements that influence women's participation abilities can be a very challenging landscape to maneuver and to navigate through. The second is that it's extremely difficult to create trust. As I talked about, the trust piece is really important, and information disseminated via ICTs in particular tends to often not be trusted by the population that they're trying to benefit. And third, the inclusion of women in participatory processes and programs can sometimes backfire and be unproductive if women's interests, their pre-existing inequalities, and the specifics of the local context are not taken into account. So that's to say that there's risk that the inclusion of women in the participatory processes might translate into more work for them without any practical benefit for them. So with that said, Genevieve is going to go over some of the recommendations and other best practices that we've identified.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alix. Sorry, next slide, please. Next slide. So as Alix mentioned, we explored the Grameen Foundation's Community Knowledge Worker Program and found that although it does utilize the information communication technology, there lacks an explicit gender approach that could really help close some of these gender gaps in agricultural yield and productivity. And there is a unique opportunity through the Community Knowledge Worker Program and structure to take advantage of ICT to develop just a stronger gender-sensitive program to really tackle these challenges that farmers face and enhance its effectiveness. So what I'm going to outline in the final stages of this webinar before we open up for questions is a bit about how the Community Knowledge Worker Program is actually already taking a gender approach, explore some of the lessons that we've learned from our literature analysis and interviews, as well as the exploration of the Community Knowledge Worker Program. So some of these current gender approaches, there are several approaches that the Community Knowledge Worker Program is currently taking to increase female inclusion. For example, during recruitment of the community knowledge workers, local council chiefs are informed of the need to target female participation. Grameen Foundation also insists that meetings are not begun until there's at least 40 to 50% of female farmer representation. So that ensures that women are at least at the table for these meetings. However, it's been noted that women often have to be encouraged to speak up. So despite them being in attendance, they might not be actively participating. Regarding women who are selected as community knowledge worker agents, Grameen Foundation staff, once they have been selected, Grameen Foundation staff will visit their home and ask the permission of the husband or a male figure to have the woman engage in the Community Knowledge Worker Program and sensitize the man or men and to discuss the benefits of the program to helping the community. So in this, they'll talk about the scope of the program and the benefits to the home. So normally men will agree to allow women's participation following this process. And this is a very good practice that the Grameen Foundation takes. Also, they offer at the CKW agent training, Grameen Foundation will allow for children to come, which allows women to be able to not have to leave their children at home, which is also a very important piece that might inhibit some women from being able to attend trainings. And finally, Grameen Foundation advises the female CKW agents to allow their husband to have control of a solar charging unit that comes with the mobile device so that the men receive something. And this is also a good practice that Grameen Foundation does. Moving on to the next slide. Through our analyses, our interviews, etc. So these are some of the lessons learned that we have found. First of all, there is currently a lack of sex disaggregated data, essentially meaning that there isn't data that's broken out by male and female. This is currently changing in the recent CKW program, and so more and more data is actually sex disaggregated, which has been great. And this is really important because if you're going to understand the impacts on men and women, as well as inform a more general understanding of men and women's needs, responsibilities, and gaps, having this information can be really helpful. Secondly, there is a lack of gender-specific content to females based on their role, to farmers based on their roles and responsibilities. So, for example, female banana farmers express a significantly lower willingness to adopt good agricultural practices, indicating that a different approach by CKWs may be needed to encourage them to adopt new practices. So if there is more specific content to their needs, then this can increase adoption of these practices. Thirdly, women face higher entry barriers to becoming community knowledge worker agents. So Grameen Foundation has noted various challenges in recruiting female CKW agents for lots of different reasons. And some of those reasons are that women might have lower literacy levels and therefore can't engage confidently in the program. As Alix mentioned, women also often face time constraints. They have these time constraints from their traditional tasks, but also in addition, what we found is that a lot of the ladies who are becoming CKW agents are also picked up by several development agencies. So they have a couple different tasks and requests upon them already. There are some selection challenges as well. So given the patriarchal society in Uganda, men need to accept to recruit female CKW agents. Some of our secondary research showed that women are less exposed to the nominating organizations that help select these potential CKW agents. So local extension workers and partner organizations have found it more challenging to identify potential CKW agents. And then also the cost of taking care of kids and having babysitters during the mandatory trainings for CKW can be a challenge. This can be overcome, however, with the practice that Grameen Foundation is doing, which offers the child services at trainings. So an additional lesson learned is that women face greater constraints as community knowledge worker agents. This is related to the high entry barriers that women face to become CKW agents that I was just talking about. And there are several reasons for this, which stem from the challenges that women face. Again, from Alix's section before. And that is that women have lower education and lower literacy levels relative to male counterparts. So that's a constraint that they face as a CKW agent. They're also less likely to be fluent in English relative to male counterparts. They have higher labor demands in the field and household relative to male counterparts as well. Again, highlighting that triple role that Alix mentioned in the previous section. And therefore, they have less time to dedicate towards training and meeting farmers. CKW agents are estimated to put in 10 hours on average per week, is what we've heard from Grameen staff. But female CKW agents can have greater costs in terms of time and money due to their double duties in the home and the field. So even though it may be the same amount of time, it might mean something different to a male versus a female. Also, women have mobility restrictions that can make it hard to travel and conduct surveys as well as meet with other farmers. Some way around this is that women can hire bikes, get to locations, or can take buses, but it's important to recognize this. Women also have less control over mobile devices relative to male counterparts. Some of the reports that we have explored reveal that women may have to share airtime they receive with their husbands who are not CKW agents. Thus, this inhibits their usage and access to consistent information. And then last of all, there's a lack of understanding of what occurs within the homes of female CKW agents. So Grameen Foundation will make payments to CKW agents through their phones via mobile money. And we've heard from some Grameen staff that they believe that the female controls this particular income, but it's not clear as to what extent there is income distribution. And there have not been any reported challenges that technology or earned income is causing regarding conflict in the home. But more research in this area is generally needed. So that's kind of one of the points that we've noticed for more exploration. Moving on to the next slide, despite these challenges, there are various opportunities, and initial evidence gathered from the Grameen Foundation highlights that it is very important to recruit and engage women as CKW agents. Women farmers are found being more likely to seek advice if the CKW agent is a woman. 63% of female farmers in the program are receiving information from a female CKW. Cultural and religious attitudes about gender roles and relationships continue to deter women in rural areas from interacting with men. So again, having a woman that these female farmers can talk to is really important. A report from 2010 found that women farmers are more likely to return to a female CKW agent than a male CKW agent. And very importantly, despite the challenges in recruiting female CKWs and the constraints that they face, there have not been notable differences in the performance of male and female CKW agents. So that's a really important point to keep in mind. I'm going to move on to our general recommendations on the next slide. And this is kind of the crux of our research and what we'd like you as practitioners to take away from is just these general recommendations in particular. So first of all, our first recommendation is to conduct separate gender analyses in each region of the program and include in these analyses things such as where and how men and women participate in maize, coffee, and banana crop production and selling. What information and services men and women farmers need and how they currently meet those needs. What are the current and existing information channels that women use? What are the roles and responsibilities that men and women have beyond agricultural responsibilities? And what are the time constraints and general challenges faced? So we've kind of highlighted here a bit of the overarching general challenges and time constraints, but a deeper analysis could reveal more information here. The second recommendation is to provide specific information that's relevant to male farmers and specific information that's relevant to female farmers based on that gender analysis results. Particular attention should be paid to any further analysis that sheds light on differences between male and female banana farmers' willingness to adopt good agronomic practices and to use price information for farm sales. Collecting information on what male and female farmers are interested in learning about can help CKWs be more responsive to their needs. Third is to collect sex disaggregated data throughout data collection that can continually help to inform the gender-specific gaps and potential content. As we talked about before, Grameen Foundation is now within the Uganda CKW program is now collecting more of the sex disaggregated data. But this kind of having this data is really important and is a great first step, but also having that data to help inform how the program is conducted and help address certain gaps is what can move this forward even more. Fourth is to work with women's producer and cooperative organizations. So by working through producer and co-op organizations, Grameen Foundation can first of all recruit community knowledge worker agents, and two, provide information services to groups. For example, savings and credit cooperatives or village saving and loan association. One idea, for example, is to recruit leaders of women's groups and provide services to the group by working through that leader. Most female farmers belong to women's groups that farm and save money together, so these networks can potentially be tapped into and would be a really great opportunity to do so. Fifth is to create spaces for female farmers to use their voice and share feedback. So one option is to organize sessions at appropriate times and places for female farmers where they can come together and discuss topics around farming. This can ensure that feedback is received from female farmers and also allows them to use their voices to discuss challenges and opportunities. And ultimately, that can help inform how to better tailor programs to improve the situations that women face. The truth is that mixed gender groups often result in women keeping quiet, which has been something that we have found was confirmed by Grameen Foundation staff on the ground. Grameen Foundation has observed that women in these cases need to be asked to respond, and therefore having and allowing the space for women to share other needs and challenges in their lives is something that can be really beneficial. Lastly, for our general recommendations, before I jump into the specific recommendations we have for female CKWs, is to create a holistic approach to support female farmers. Women are not only hard-pressed by issues of farming, but also other issues that, if not addressed, might result in women not paying attention to other technologies or extension services. Therefore, in the gender analysis and in sessions for groups of female farmers, understanding what other challenges women face and trying to support them through access to support services, other technologies, or information can be extremely valuable. An example here is that if a woman expresses concern with smoke in her home, trying to provide information on where to find an improved cook stove distributor would be a great option. Or if women express concerns around nutrition for their children, trying to provide tips on nutrition tips can also be something that's really valuable. By having this sort of holistic approach to women farmers based on listening to their needs, there could be an increase in their agency. Agency is the ability to make and act upon decisions, and it's a very important central piece of empowerment. So in addition, by providing these more holistic services, women are ultimately more likely to appreciate the program. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, these are the final recommendations, and these are specific to the female CKW agents. First is to consider household solutions, where spouses have complementary roles and can support one another and bridge gender divides, such as CKW spousal teams. We know that these already do exist in some locations, but perhaps to expand this is an option. Second is to offer additional optional training to female CKW agents, such as literacy classes or support in this agency-based empowerment that I discussed previously, that critical piece of empowerment that is about being able to make and act on decisions. Any training needs to ensure that time and location is appropriate for women, and accommodation for younger children doing these longer trainings in particular should be offered. Enhancing the agency of CKW agents can result in an increase of their effectiveness. Enhancing their agency can be done directly through training programs. There are existing agency-based empowerment programs that focus on these internal concepts such as self-awareness, self-efficacy, and self-confidence. Agency can also be enhanced by creating an enabling environment and providing one with a support system, such as through mentors or peer groups. Which brings me to the next recommendation, which is to provide female CKW agents with mentors, as well as access to all female peer groups. Providing this space for several female CKW agents to come together can be particularly effective, as it allows women to discuss challenges. While there are mixed gender peer groups organized after the induction trainings currently, having female-only groups could result in greater participation and allow this forum where they can discuss gender-specific challenges and solutions. Also, having female CKW agents taught about problem solving and going through this with their mentors can be really valuable. Is something that we've learned with various other programs that work with women as micro-entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in developing country contexts. Having successful female CKW agents become recruiters and mentors is the fourth recommendation. So by doing this, you can support the creation of a tiered system of support. So district champions, trainers who have been assigned to districts, may also be able to fill this mentor role. And then finally is to allow flexible schedules and a lower time commitment for female CKW agents. The challenge with and for female CKW agents has been and remains to be how they divide up their time to conduct these CKW activities, as well as their daily chores that they need to complete. So by adopting these flexible schedules and reducing the time commitment for female CKWs, Grameen Foundation, they will reduce the time commitment for female CKWs. So Grameen Foundation currently helps to schedule around household tasks, and this should be continued, but it might also be valuable to sketch out potential part-time or flexible schedule options for women. So just some final notes before we open it up for questions. The CKW program is an effective and established program that's very well positioned to further support female farmers in this increasingly volatile environment. And the CKW program can heighten its potential impact through this explicit gender focus that we've discussed about here. Ultimately, a holistic approach is needed to support female farmers as well as these female CKW agents. The recommendations that we've talked about are applicable to other programs that target female farmers and can be adapted, implemented, and further iterated in gender-sensitive agricultural programs. I'm going to open it up for questions now. I also do want to say that we have a longer paper that we've written on this with the specific information. I know this was a lot of information that we've downloaded here, so can let someone know if that is of interest to read the longer paper as well. Thank you.
Okay, so we have about 15 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to unmute themselves.
This is Debbie Dean. I have a question. Can we go back a couple slides to where you say that there's no performance difference? Yeah, go forward. There. Back one. It's where the last statement says no performance difference. My question was, it's a different slide, but yeah, right. Anyway, so I think some of the comments in the slide actually talk to what seems like differences. Could you, where female farmers are actually we're seeing different results by CKW agents that are women. So can you talk to how you're talking about the difference between that? Right there. So we talk about how 63% of the women in the program are receiving information and that women are more likely to return to a female, but yet we talk about that there's no noticeable differences. So are you so between the male and female agents, can you just clarify what sounds like that is the opposite?
Yeah, sure. Sorry for the confusion caused there. Essentially what we're saying is that the abilities for male and female CKW agents to impact farmers, there aren't any notable differences between how those male and female CKW agents, when they're working with those farmers, if, for example, the farmers that work with male CKW agents have higher GAPs than the ones with women or something like that. The performance of the farmers that work with the male and female CKW agents are comparable.
Oh, so it's no difference in the farmers, no difference in the agents.
Yes, right. So the performance of how they're able to impact those farmers.
Got it. Okay. And is someone on the call that's talking about how we're actually incorporating these recommendations into the programs across the board? I think that's probably asked to Christina.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. No, that's a good question. It's definitely a next step. It's something that we talked to Neve and Whitney and Anna about, and how to incorporate this great study and analysis into the current programs.
Yeah. Hi, this is Steve Hollingworth. Thanks so much for the presentation. It's really very, very helpful. I was just interested in kind of any views you might have on our partners in this space and what, their mission and capability would be to move forward on this, and, what support might they need from us to do this?
Sure. So we didn't really analyze the different partners that Green Foundation is currently working with in the CKW program. And as far as their mission and capability to be able to move forward with these recommendations, these were more just general recommendations that we highlighted as what we would suggest based on the landscape analysis that we did of the CKW program. I think one of the important pieces that that Green Foundation can particularly take on is engaging more women's groups in particular that we talked about and working through those women's groups. So even expanding some of the partnerships to do that. And I think a more thorough view on an analysis on the different partners in the space and how they can move forward these recommendations would be a good next step as well.
Great. Thanks so much.
Are there any other questions? Or I'm not sure if it's a good opportunity to talk with, or if maybe the LAC or team or Alfred can talk about anything they're seeing in the field, and maybe anything they're thinking about with how to implement these recommendations in their programs. Or
Hi, Ms. Lina. This is Eliana. I have a comment on the slides. From our experience here in the ACT programs in Colombia, we found out that we must be very careful when trying to conduct a gender approach, because most of the time it can cause some disparities or unconformities between male farmers. So what would be the best way to conduct a gender approach without causing that and without discriminating male farmers? And I mean, what we want to do is just to incorporate female into our interventions, but without sacrificing the rest of providing opportunities in an equal way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is always a concern. You do have to be careful when you're implementing a gender approach, because not only can it cause disparities with the male farmers, but there is potential to cause issues within households. If there's any sort of shift in power dynamics, for example, between men and women in the household. And so how you do this is carefully, first of all. But any gender approach should begin with a gender analysis to understand what are the roles and responsibilities as well as needs of men and women in a certain area. And then you can adapt and iterate these the recommendations that we've provided. They aren't necessarily the silver bullet, but they are a good framework that you can use in coming up with your gender approach. So again, some recommendations would be to look at perhaps having these CKW spouses. So including men and women from a household in doing these programs. In addition, really important to have these spaces for the female farmers to come together. So again, perhaps that is working or creating these all-female peer groups. Perhaps that is working with women's groups in particular. I'm not sure what the situation is in Colombia as far as how popular women's groups are, but that is a really great opportunity to work with leaders of those women's groups to discuss with female farmers some of the challenges and opportunities they face. And it's not disrupting or changing any current social situation. It's more just taking advantage of the fact that women come together in these natural groups already. So those are a couple of just initial recommendations, I would say. Happy to kind of discuss that a bit more. And again, looking into doing a gender analysis to start with, and really keeping in mind that a gender approach should be done with care and takes time.
For the Ghana Office for Agri Projects now, what we're doing is to make some deliberate effort to actually also include female agents, agri extension agents. And for us, these agents are mapped onto about 100 smallholder farmers that they're supposed to reach. What we want to find out is to actually see the interaction that goes on between the women agents, agri extension agents, and male smallholder farmers. Because this about 100 smallholder farmers that these agents are meeting are both males and females. But for us, we are very interested in exploring and find out more about that relationship, that working relationship between the female agri extension agents and male smallholder farmers that they will be assisting with agri extension information.
Yeah, that's I think that's another research gap, is to understand the relationship between female agricultural agents and male smallholder farmers. That is another area for further exploration, I think. Did you have a question in particular and specific to that scenario? I think it's very interesting, with the process you're already taking.
So we are just about the implementation phase. So we have our baseline and we would be finding out, how this plays out during implementation and actually after implementation of the project.
Great. Yeah, that's really exciting. And if you have any specific questions as you continue to roll that out, happy to answer them and help support. Our emails are on the last slide here, and Christina has them as well.
Yeah, and this will also be posted, and then we can put your email addresses on there as well and your contact information. And also we could probably post your longer paper as well. Are there any other questions out there? If there aren't any questions, we have about 3 minutes left. Genevieve, do you want to go through the last slide, or do you want to skip it?
I think I could outline it, sure.
Okay. All right. Go for it.
Sure. So a final thing that we included, and this was in the appendix, but can be valuable just for people to understand, is we also have some general policy recommendations. So a lot of the challenges that that women might face, are larger challenges within more of the system. And so some of the policy recommendations that we have are to further support adult literacy programs and have this focus on women in particular. And then also generally just have services to support climate smart mobile technology. So this is beyond just the gender approach, but also the general CKW program. And that is to have greater access to power, so wireless technology and electrical power sources, access to technical training for women within these mobile technologies, access to different marketing opportunities, improved information systems and adaptive agriculture, and then having more intensification practices and techniques within these services to support the climate smart mobile technology. So that's kind of a really brief overview of some of our policy recommendations. We have a full page in the appendix of the report that Christina mentioned. Will outlines these a bit more if you're curious about that in particular. So yeah, and thank you very much for having us on the call today. We really enjoyed doing this research with Grameen Foundation over the course of several months at the end of last year. and hope that it's useful and can help move forward some of these practices to incorporate more of a gender lens within the program.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for presenting, Genevieve, Juno, and Alex. Really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you very much. And I think we ran out of time, so we're getting
Okay,
there.
great.
All
Well,
right,
thank you everyone for joining.
thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.